Now let's start the show. Stepping on the code. We come from the code to the top of the globe.
Yo guys, what up? It's your boy DBK here, back with another video, and this one is a bit more somber. It's going to be of a bit more somber mood than my usual videos. Now, for a really long time, I've been wanting to do a video regarding some more serious topics. One of the more serious topics that I wanted to cover was the effects of an effect of colonialism on a country. Now, this is going to be quite a long video, just as a disclaimer, so pause now if you want to go get refreshments or whatnot. But in this video I'm going to be talking about the Belgian Congo and the reign of King Leopold II, and the horror and the atrocities that were brought upon due to his reign over Congo, and Congo as a country is, and how it's been pretty much messed up, and they still haven't really recovered properly. So I'm gonna read through 3 different articles. Like I said, it's a long video, so if you haven't got the time to watch it now, it's okay, you can watch it later. But yeah, let's get into this. King Leopold's legacy of DR Congo violence. Of the Europeans who scrambled for control of Africa at the end of the 19th century, Belgium's King Leopold II left arguably the largest and most horrid legacy of all. While the great powers competed for territory elsewhere, the king of one of Europe's smallest countries carved out his own private colony out of 100 kilometers squares of Central African rainforest. He claimed he was doing it to protect the natives from the Arab slavers and to open the heart of Africa to Christian missionaries and Western capitalists. Instead, as the makers of BBC4 documentary White King, Red Rubber, Black Death powerfully argue, the king unleashed new horrors onto the African continent. Also, White King, Red Rubber, Black Death is a documentary which you should be able to find freely on YouTube, and if this sort of topic interests you, I recommend you to go and watch that. Torment and rape. He turned his Congo Free State into a massive labour camp, made a fortune for himself from the harvest of its wild rubber, and contributed in a large way to the death of perhaps 10 million innocent people. 10 million people. Okay. Now imagine if that had happened in the West. Imagine if that had happened in a European country where 10 million people had been slaughtered innocently for no other reason other than their race. We have had something similar to that, and it's called the Holocaust, and frequently gets spoken about, whereas I haven't heard one person in the media ever bring up the atrocities of the Belgian Congo. What is now called the Democratic Republic of Congo has clearly never recovered. Legalized robbery enforced by violence, as Leopold's reign was described at the time, has remained, more or less, the template by which Congo's rulers have governed ever since. Meanwhile, Congo's soldiers have never moved away from the role allocated to them by Leopold, as a force to coerce, torment, and rape an unarmed civilian population. As the BBC's reporter in DR Congo, I covered stories that were loud echoes of what was happening 100 years earlier. The film opens with the shocking images of some of Leopold's victims, children and adults whose right hands had been hacked off by his agents. They needed to prove that they to their superiors that they had not been wasting their bullets on animals. This rule was seldom observed, as soldiers kept shooting monkeys and later chopping off human hands to provide their alibis. And as the picture has a little caption, men who failed to bring enough rubber for agents were killed. So these people who were living in their land, I guess relatively peacefully, had other people come into their land with more advanced technology such as guns, shoot and kill their families and threaten them to get rubber from rubber trees. Otherwise they would cut off their hands or kill them. And this is all only just 100 years ago, people. Foreign correspondence. Director Pete Bate used documented accounts of such atrocities to present an imaginary court case against the monarch, who he compares as a subsequent European tyrant, Adolf Hitler. He has an act to play the bearded, heavily set Leopold, fidgeting nervously as damning testimonies are read out, compiled by the foreign correspondents of the day, the missionaries. John Harris of Berenga, for example, was so shocked by what he had come across that he felt moved to write a letter to Leopold's chief agent in the Congo. I have just returned from a journey inland to the village of Nsonga Mboyo. The abject misery and utter abandon is positively indescribable. I was so moved, Your Excellency, by the people's stories, that I took the liberty of promising them that in the future you will only kill them for the crimes they commit. Positive legacy. In the film's most powerful sequences, we see reconstructions of the terror caused by Leopold's enforcers and agents. We see a village burnt without warning and its people rounded up, its men sent off into the forest and its women tied up as hostages and helpless targets of abuse until their husbands returned with enough wild rubber to satisfy the agent. This, we are told, was the moment of truth for the whole community. If the men did not bring back enough, the agent lost his commission and would order the deaths of everyone. There is no doubt that the Congo's history, the White King, the Red Rubber, and the Black Death, are almost too upsetting to bear. However, Leopold did leave, albeit unwittingly, one positive legacy: the birth of modern humanitarianism. The campaign to reveal the truth behind Leopold's secret society of murderers, led by diplomat Roger Casamont and former shipping clerk Ed Morel, became the first mass human rights movement. Its successors like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and Kinshasa-based Voix des Sans-Voix and Journalistes en Danger mean abusers in modern-day DR Congo can never be hidden for long. So that's a BBC article, relatively short, but it does give a small snippet of what it was like in under the reign of King Leopold II of Belgium in Belgian Congo, or being a native of Belgian Congo during those times. Now, the next article I've got is titled "The Butcher of Congo, King Leopold II of Belgium." Now, it was pretty difficult for me to find really good study articles, because I would have preferred to go through one of those with you guys, but it's really difficult to find one that you don't have to pay for or sign up for, like to pay for the studies as such. So all of these I've got are just articles by journalists, and none of them are really by professors, which is a shame, but hopefully it still gives you guys an idea of the reign. King Leopold II of Belgium was responsible for the deaths and mutilation of 10 million Congolese Africans during the late 1800s. The spoils of modern-day Belgium owes much to the people of Congo River Basin. In a testament to the hideous brutality of the European colonial era and imperialism in its finest form during the 1800s, when Europe was busy dividing up the continent of Africa like a vast chocolate cake, King Leopold II of Belgium laid personal claim to the largely uncharted Congo Free State. The 905,000 square miles, 76 times larger than Belgium. Remember, Belgium's a really small country. Of the African rainforest held a vast fortune in rubber plantations, a commodity in high demand in the late 19th century industrial Europe. Dark-hearted Leopold II. In 1876, Leopold formed the philanthropic organization Association Internationale Africaine, International African Association, and became a single shareholder. Under the guise of missionary work and westernization of African peoples, Leopold II used the International African Association to further his ambitions of empire building in the hope of bringing international prestige to the relatively small Belgium. In reality, the International African Association was a vehicle to enslave the people of the Congo River Basin and enrich Leopold II. In 23 years, from 1885 to 1908, King Leopold II ruled the Congo. He massacred 10 million Africans by cutting off their hands and genitals, flogging them to death, starving them into forced labor, holding children ransom, and burning villages. The ironic part of the story is that King Leopold II committed these atrocities by not even setting foot in the Congo. It must be noted, however, that whilst much attention has been given to Leopold's atrocities in the Congo, in the same period, acts of brutality were being committed on native peoples elsewhere. Britain on the Aborigines in Australasia, the United States on Native Americans and Filipinos, French on Northwest Congolese, Spain on the North and Central Native Americans, Portuguese on the Angolans, Amazonians, and Germans on the Southwest Africans. However, so severe was the brutality of the genocide of the Leopold's Congo that many a European visitor publicly condemned Leopold and the Belgian government. The veracity of the crimes was so well known that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle penned the book The Crime of the Congo in 1909, highlighting the plight of the Congolese. Leopold's contract. Unable to read or write, the Congolese tribal chiefs unwittingly sold their tribal members into a lifetime of slavery for pieces of cloth. The same way in which the African slave trade kind of was held up. Because, some of the kings and chiefs would sell their own people for mirrors. They would sell like 50 people for a mirror just so they could look in their reflection. Crazy, huh? In return for 1 piece of cloth per month to each of the undersigned chiefs, besides present of cloth in hand, they promised to freely, of their own accord, for themselves and their heirs and successors forever, give up the said association set up by Leopold, a sovereignty and all sovereign and governing rights to all their territories, and to assist by labour or otherwise all works, improvements, or expeditions which the said association shall cause at any time to be carried out in the part of these territories, all roads and waterways running through this country, the right of the governing tolls on the same, and all game, fishing, mining, and forest rights are the absolute property of the said association, for 1 piece of cloth per month. Amazing. Incredible. Severed hands. Such was the brutality of Leopold's Congo that those who failed to meet the rubber quotas set by the Belgian officers were routinely flogged with the chicote or had their hands severed. The chicote was a whip made of raw, sun-dried hippopotamus hide cut into long, sharp-edged corkscrew strips. It was applied to bare buttocks and left permanent scars. 20 strokes of it sent its victims into unconsciousness, and 100 or more strokes were often fatal. The chicote was freely used by both Leopold's men and the French. So here we have a picture, and the caption says, below, British missionaries with men holding hands from severed from victims named Boulanger and Ligombo by ABIR militiamen, circa 1904. So also, it has another caption saying, Congolese posing with severed hands of those who failed to make the daily rubber sap quota. Leopold used private mercenary force publique, to do his terrorizing and killing. White officers commanded black soldiers, many of whom were cannibals from tribes in the Upper Congo, and others who had been kidnapped as children during raids on surrounding villages and raided missionaries. An FP junior soldier described a raid to punish the village that had protested in the following words: the commanding officer ordered us to cut off the hands of the men and hang them on the village palisades. Also, their sexual members, and hang the women and children on the palisade in the form of a cross. So here is just a collage of people who have had their hands cut off. Obviously, a lot of people were left alive, or kept alive, as a warning to people who disobeyed, that this was what was going to happen to them, or this was what was going to happen if you disobeyed. Leopold's fortune. Leopold II was at one stage reputed to be the richest man in the world, with a personal fortune of somewhere between $100 million and $500 million. It's not bad. Not bad. Most of his wealth was handed over to the Belgian government after his death. Present-day Democratic Congo. The present-day Democratic Congo, Republic of Congo, is estimated to hold 24 trillion US dollars in untapped minerals, mostly diamonds. Following the independence of the Congo from Belgium in June 1960, Patrice Lumumba, leader of the Mouvement National Congolais, MNC, was elected Congo's first democratically elected president. 10 weeks later, following a coup d'etat headed by General Mobutu Sese Seko, Patrice Lumumba was murdered by firing squad. Wow, 10 weeks after being elected. Evidence has recently emerged to show that the US and Belgium's government involvement in his murder. Surprise. Mobutu, who institutionalized corruption in the country, apparently looted up to $4 billion US dollars before he was subsequently ousted by rebel leader Laurent Kabila. Kabila was assassinated in 2001, and after a brief return to civil war, his son, Joseph Kabila, became democratically elected president in 2006. So that's the second article, which goes a bit more in depth than the first article by the BBC. And what we've got next is actually one which is from it's a killer file, believe it or not. So heroes and killers of the 20th century from moreorless.net.au. And this one is quite long, and it's actually a time. It's got timeline in it, so it basically goes through years and stuff like that, and specific stuff that kind of happened in those years. So let's get into it. King Leopold II, aka King Leopold II of Belgium. Country, Belgium, Free Congo State, present-day Democratic Republic of Congo. Kill tally, 5 to 15 million Congolese, the indigenous inhabitants of the Congo River Basin. Background: the Portuguese navigator Diogo Chao reaches the Congo River in 1483. Commerce between the coastal Congo Kingdom and Portugal develops quickly, with the trade in slaves soon coming to dominate all other exchanges. The Dutch begin to arrive in the 17th century, to be followed by the French and the British. As the influence of the Europeans steadily moves inland, the Congo River basin is raised in the imagination of the West, with the exploits of 19th century explorers such as David Livingstone receiving wide publicity. Mini biography. Born on 19th of April 1835 in Brussels, the capital of Belgium. He is the eldest son of King Leopold I, first king of the Belgians. His full name is Leopold Louis Philippe Marie Victor. In line with royal tradition, he enters the Belgian army at an early age, serving in the Grenadiers, where he is appointed as second lieutenant. Leopold will also become a member of the Belgian Senate. Okay, so at 1946, when he was 11, he's given the title of Duke of the Brabant. In 1953, Leopold marries Marie Henrietta, daughter of Archduke Joseph of Austria, on 22nd of August. They have 4 children, 3 daughters and a son. The son dies at age 9. First years of Leopold's married life are spent travelling through Italy, Austria, Palestine and Greece. In 1955, he is promoted to Lieutenant General and serves as honorary commander of his regiment. In the 1960s, Leopold becomes one of the most widely travelled of the European monarchs, spending most of the first half of the 1860s abroad. In 1860, he journeys to Istanbul, the capital of the Ottoman Empire. In 1862, he travels to Spain, Morocco, Algiers, Tunis, and Egypt. At the beginning of 1864, he begins a lengthy tour of Britain, India, and China. At the same time, Leopold continues to advocate his long-held belief that Belgium should become a colonial power. I believe that the moment has come for us to extend our territories. I think that we should lose no time under the penalty of seeing few remaining good positions seized upon by more enterprising nations than our own, he says in 1860. In 1861, he advises the Belgians to intimidate your neighbours, extend beyond your seas wherever an opportunity is offered, and you will find precious outlets for your products, food for your commerce, and a still better position in the great European family. At 1865, Leopold assumes the throne following his father's death on December the 10th, proclaiming that all I desire is to leave Belgium larger, stronger, and more beautiful. However, as a constitutional monarch, he has no power to decide government policy. Over the next 20 years, Leopold lobbies that the Belgian parliament get a colony in our turn. After various unsuccessful attempts, he eventually resolves to establish his own private colony, deciding that Central Africa holds the greatest potential. A short break, and then in 1874, meanwhile, with the backing of the United States and British newspapers, Henry Morton Stanley begins an ambitious transcontinental expedition of Africa. Over 3 years, he travels 11,000 kilometers from the east coast of the headwaters of the Congo River and then down the river to the Atlantic. In 1876, Leopold sponsors an international geographic conference in Brussels where he proposes the establishment of an international benevolent committee for the propagation and civilization of the peoples of the Congo region by means of scientific exploration, legal trade, and war against the Arabic slave traders. To open to civilization the only part of the globe which has not yet been penetrated. To pierce the darkness which hangs over entire peoples is, I dare say, a crusade worthy of this century of progress, Leopold says at the conference. The Association Internationale Africaine, International Association of African Association, is consequently formed with Leopold as the president. Leopold in 1878 sets up the Comité d'Études du Congo, or the CEHC. Sorry, I'm not really that great with French. An international, commercial, scientific, and humanitarian committee. Right. And commissions Henry Morton Stanley to further explore the Congo. However, Stanley's real mission will be to establish Belgian sovereignty along the river south bank and monopoly control over the Congo rubber and ivory trade. I'm sure if I quite openly charge Stanley with the task of taking possession in my name of some part of Africa, the English will stop me, Leopold says. So I think I'll just give Stanley some job of exploration which would offend no one, and will give us the bases and headquarters on which we can take over later on. Excuse me. Privately, Leopold tells Stanley to purchase as much land as he'll be able to obtain, and place successively under suzerainty. I've never heard that word in my life. As soon as possible without losing 1 minute. All chiefs from the mouth of the Congo to the Stanley Falls. Leopold also tells Stanley, it is a question of creating a new state, as big as possible, and of running it. It's clearly understood that in this project there will be no question of granting the slightest political power for Negroes. That would be absurd. Over the course of 2 trips that last until 1884, Stanley buys all the ivory he can. He founds a number of settlements, including Leopoldville, now Kinshasa, somewhere. Always mess that one up. And constructs a wagon wheel? Sorry, I used to eat them when I was a kid. A wagon trail from the lower river upstream past 200 kilometers of rapids to Stanley Pool, now Pool and Malabo, where the river again becomes navigable. That doesn't sound like a real word. He signs over 450 treaties on behalf of Leopold, where chiefs who knowingly or otherwise agree to give up sovereignty of their land in exchange for bolts of cloth and trinkets. Leopold asks that the treaties be as brief as possible, and in a couple of articles must grant us everything. Among the Congolese, Stanley becomes to be known as the Bula Matadi, he who breaks rocks in the language of the Congo people. The term is later used as a generic description for Leopold's colonial system. In 1882, the CEHC is reorganized as the Association Internationale du Congo, AIC, an International Association of Congo for those who couldn't translate, a single shareholder development company wholly owned by Leopold, who now begins to push for territory covered by Stanley's treaties to be recognized by the international community as a sovereign state. In 1884, in November 14th of that year, European nations Austria-Hungary, Belgium, Denmark, France, Germany, Great Britain, Holland, Italy, Norway, Portugal, Russia, Spain, Sweden, and Turkey, and the US meet up at the Conference of Berlin, called to carve up Central Africa among them. The Conference of Berlin concludes in February. France is given 670,000 square kilometers on the north bank of the Congo, modern-day Congo Brazzaville, and Central African Republic, and Portugal 910,000 square kilometers of the south, modern-day Angola. I'm sure Mozambique was somewhere in there as well. After some deft manipulation, Leopold's claims to the remaining 2.3 million square kilometers on the south bank of the Congo are recognized, and the État indépendant du Congo and the Congo Free State, CFS, is founded under his personal rule. Leopold is the proclaimed sovereign of the new state on 29th of May. Boma, a town on the Congo River, about 80 kilometers upstream from the Atlantic Ocean, is named as the capital. Under the terms of the General Act of Berlin, Leopold promises to suppress the slave trade, watch over the preservation of the 20 to 30 million Congolese now subject to his rule, and improve their moral and material conditions of existence. He must also encourage missions and other philanthropic and scientific enterprises without any restriction or impediment whatsoever, and guarantee free trade. However, over the next 23 years, Leopold will amass a huge personal fortune by exploiting the Congo directly and by leasing concessions to private companies prepared to pay him 50% of their profits. The period will witness some of the worst atrocities ever committed on the African continent. However, Leopold will never visit the region, ruling instead by decree from Belgium. Leopold soon acts to secure his fiefdom? I've never heard that word in my life, so sorry if I messed that one up. Building a native army, Force Publique, Public Force, or the FP for short, composed of Congolese conscripts led by European officers, and contracting a corps of European administrators to manage all of the districts, zones, and sectors into which the colony is divided. The top 3 administrators of the CFS are appointed directly by Leopold and are accountable only to him. Ostensibly formed to put down the slave trade, the Force Publique will quickly be turned on the Congolese. Opposition of the Congolese or Arab merchants is ruthlessly suppressed, and the slave traders are forced out of the western regions of the CFS, although they are still tolerated in the east. The Congolese will be systematically exploited and abused. Their forced labor will build the colony's infrastructure, transport rubber and ivory from the interior of the river ports, and produce all the territory's food. At the same time, they will be required to pay taxes to the state, a provisions tax and a rubber tax. However, the remuneration, oh my goodness, my pronunciation is so bad today, they will receive is completely arbitrary and inadequate, and little in the revenue of the taxes was reinvested into the state. Trade in rubber and ivory is strictly controlled, despite Leopold's undertakings in the Berlin Agreement. The colony is divided into 2 economic zones, a free trade zone open to the concession holders, and Leopold's domaine privé, private domain, encompassing about 2/3 of the CFS landmass. Leopold will later excise about 1/3 of the free trade zone, forming a so-called domaine de la couronne for his exclusive enrichment. Independent traders are prohibited from operating in all zones. The Congolese are only allowed to trade with approved agents to ensure that the maximum is squeezed out of each sector. The salaries of the agents are set at a bare minimum, with the bulk of their income coming from the commission on the rubber and the ivory they supply. The agents in turn hire and arm African mercenaries, the so-called capitas, to force the Congolese under the jurisdiction to work. Communities who refuse to be intimidated or who retaliate are brought into line by the military expeditions. You don't have to really know what else they did to them. The Congolese within Leopold's private domain are subject to greater controls. They can only trade with the state and are required to supply a set quota of rubber and ivory at the fixed government-mandated price. They must provide 10% of their population as full-time forced laborers and another 25% as part-time. In 1887, all land on which no one is actually living on is declared terre vacante, vacant land, and appropriated by the state. In 1888, in November, Leopold issues 3 decrees. The first prohibits trade in arms, The second sets terms for employment of native workers, and the third establishes a force publique. The decree setting the terms of employment allows the workers to be indentured in terms of 7 years to their employers. Leopold also convinces the Belgian Parliament to advance him 10 million francs for use in the Congo, establishing a link between the government and Leopold's regime. Parliament will later provide a further loan of 25 million francs. Meanwhile, the construction of the railway line to bypass the 200-kilometer unnavigatable stretch of Congo from Matadi inland to Stanley Pool begins, with the Congolese providing the labour. The railway is completed in 1898. In 1889, on the 18th of November, the 15 signatories to the 1885 General Act of Berlin, along with Persia, gather on Leopold's invitation at the Conference of Brussels to discuss further measures for the suppression of the slave trade on the African continent. In 1890, after 33 sessions of the Conference of Brussels, concludes on the 2nd of July, with the participants declaring they are animated by the firm intention of putting an end to the crimes and devastation engendered by the traffic in African slaves, protecting effectively and the aboriginal populations of Africa, and ensuring for the vast continent the benefits of peace and civilization. The General Act ratified by the conference includes an article binding the signatories to support and, if necessary, to serve as a refuge for the native populations, to diminish intertribal wars by means of arbitration, to raise them by civilization, and to bring about the extinction of barbarous customs such as cannibalism and human sacrifices, and in giving aid to commercial enterprises to watch over their legality, controlling especially the contracts for service entered into with natives. In 1891, the price of rubber begins to increase following the invention of the inflatable rubber tire. The agents and concession holders exploiting the Congo's wild rubber vines now stand to make enormous profits, with returns of up to 700% per year being reported. To cash in on the opportunity, the Congolese labourers are squeezed further still. Local chiefs are required to supply men to collect the so-called rubber tax, with wives and children being held hostage and chiefs imprisoned until men return with the quotas. The amount of rubber needed to meet the tax requires the men to work for up to 25 days each month harvesting the wild rubber vines in the Congo forests. Failure to supply the quotas results in floggings, torture, and death. The force publique is used to ensure the Congolese comply, crushing any uprisings that result from the new demands. Meanwhile, Leopold hires the Canadian explorer and British military commander William Stairs to lead a mission to take control of the copper lands of Katanga. In 1892, the so-called Arab campaign to drive the remaining slave traders out of the east of the CFS begins. The region is secured by 1894. The Stokes affair rises an early warning on the abuses inside the CFS. Charles Henry Stokes, a British-born trader, is arrested for illegally trading, summarily tried, and then hung the next day. The incident is met with indignation in both England and Germany. The outside world gets another glimpse of Leopold's regime when on 12th of March a question is asked in the British Parliament about the treatment of the natives from Britain's African colonies who had been employed to work in the CFS. According to the British Secretary for the State of the Colonies, the natives had complained of being forcibly drafted as soldiers and of being flogged and in some instances shot. In consequence, these complaints received, the recruitment of labourers for the Congo has been prohibited, the Secretary says. In 1897, Leopold issues his Gospel of Labour decree to his agents in Congo, telling them to place the population under new laws, the most imperious as well as the most salutary of which is assured that of work. Ownership of the most of the Belgium registered companies holding concessions in the CFS is handed over to Leopold. In 1899, Joseph Conrad publishes his novel Heart of Darkness, which is based on the experiences of him as a merchant seaman on the Congo River in 1890. In 1900, when the Congolese start to refuse to work under the prevailing conditions, Leopold's agents begin to pay the chiefs to supply volunteer workers. Slaves are also appropriated from Arab traders. Resistance to Leopold's rule again mounts and is again crushed, with local chiefs organizing many uprisings. The Babua tribes revolt in 1903, 1904, and 1910, and the Budia in 1903 and 1905. In 1895 and 1897, the forced public mutinies. I'm so terrible. As the resistance increases, so does the cost of repression, causing Leopold to declare a state monopoly on rubber and ivory in a bid to recover the increasing costs of maintaining control. The force publique alone soaks up half the Congo's restricted budget. At its peak, the force publique numbers about 19,000 African conscripts, led by about 420 European officers. The force commits many atrocities to terrorize the Congolese into complying with Leopold's ever-increasing demands. Villages are burned, men and women and children are indiscriminately slaughtered and forced into slavery. To prove the success of their patrols, the force publique soldiers are ordered to cut off and bring back a dead victim's right hand for every bullet fired. Soldiers resort to cutting off the hands of the living to ensure that the number of spent cartridges tally up with the number of preserved hands. They are also reported to engage in cannibalism. The headquarters of the force publique leader Leon Rom exemplifies the gruesome nature of the regime. The fence surrounding Rom's office bears 7 native head on each slat, and the garden contains a rockery full of rotting heads. The terror campaign succeeds, and Leopold's profits soar. Meanwhile, news of the atrocity filters out of the CFS, with Protestant missionaries and disaffected agents providing early alerts. Their stories are at first disbelieved, with Leopold initiating a publicity and media campaign to discredit the claims and suppress the evidence. To support his case, Leopold points out to the commission composed of missionaries he has set up to protect the Congolese and report any cases of abuse, although that commission is said by witnesses to be largely bogus, and the investigation into the cases that do come to light. Leopold also uses bribery to silence the media. When has that never happened? In 1901, after discovering what he later describes as a secret society of murderers with a king for a partner, Edmund Dene Morel, a British shipping clerk employed to oversee shipments to and from the Congo, begins a campaign to expose the human rights abuses occurring in the CFS. He establishes the weekly newsletter, the West African Mail, and conducts speaking tours in Britain. The British government responds by sending the diplomat Roger Casman to the CFS in 1903 to investigate the conditions there. In 1902, following his wife's death on the 20th of September, Leopold openly consorts with his mistress Blanche Zélia Josephine Delacroix, a Parisian prostitute, scandalizing his peers who sever contact with him. The couple will have 2 children. In 1903, 20th of May, British House of Commons unanimously passes a resolution stating the government of the Congo Free State, having at its inception guaranteed the powers that its native subjects should be governed with humanity, and that no trading monopoly or privilege should be permitted within its dominions. This House requests His Majesty's government to confer with other powers signatories of the Berlin General Act, by virtue of which the Congo Free State exists, in order that the measures may be adopted to abate the evils prevalent in the state. The evils prevalent in the Congo state are, therefore, now unanimously declared by the House of Commons to be so grave as to call for international action. In July, the Belgian government spends 3 days debating the situation in the CFS, with the Minister for Foreign Affairs stating that the Congolese are not entitled to anything. Rah. In 1904, Roger Kessman's 62-page report on the CFS is published. Its descriptions of hostage-taking, floggings, mutilation, forced labor, and murder cause a public outrage. In March, with the international concern over the treatment of the Congolese growing, Morel and Casement found the Congo Reform Association, CRA, in Britain, providing a focus for one of the first human rights movements of the 20th century. A branch of the association is set up in the US later in the year. Morel gives talks and publishes books and pamphlets to publicize the plight of the Congolese. He does not shy away from using information smuggled out of the CFS by missionaries and Leopold's employees, including graphic photos of mutilations suffered by the regime's victims. I apologize, my reading is just really so off right now. The documentary evidence and photographs in particular proves crucial in a campaign to refute Leopold's denials. In Britain, the CRA receives the support of many leading figures, including Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the writer of the Sherlock Holmes mysteries. Taking to the cause of the US, Morel meets with President Theodore Roosevelt and gains the support of the African-American educator Booker T. Washington and the writer Mark Twain. In an article titled "Cruelty in the Congo Country," Washington writes, "There was never anything in American slavery that could compare to the barbarous conditions existing today in the Congo Free State." Leopold attempts to stop the flow of information coming out from the Congo and counter the campaigns of the CRA, but the public mood has turned too far against him, and the rubber atrocities being committed in CFS. Mark Twain calls Leopold the slayer of 15 million Congolese, and a greedy, grasping, avaricious, cynical, bloodthirsty old goat. His dark and graphic satire, King Leopold's Soliloquy, a defense of his Congo rule, is published in a pamphlet formed by the American Congo Reform Association in September 1905. I've spent other millions on religion and art, and what do I get for it? Nothing. Not a compliment, Twain imagines Leopold saying in the soliloquy. These generosities are studily ignored. In print, I get nothing but slanders and slanders again, and still slanders and slanders on top of slanders. Grant them true, what of it? They are all slanders, all the same, utterly uttered against the king. Belgian Parliament finally forces Leopold to set up an independent commission of inquiry, which in 1905 confirms Casman's report in the eyewitness testimony of the missionaries. However, the complete finding of the commissions were withheld from the public, who are only allowed to see a sanitized version of the report containing just the conclusions of the inquiry. The prime casualty of the inquiry is Leopold's chief secretary in the CFS, following an interview with the commissioners, commits suicide, cutting his own throat. The only people to face prosecution as a result of the commission are several of the missionaries who provided evidence, brought to court for criminal libel, they face custodial sentences or a fine. Leopold responds to the commission by setting up a new inquiry to study the conclusions of the commissions of inquiry, to formulate the proposals they call for, and to seek for practical means for realizing them. Stacked with Leopold's cronies, the new inquiry achieves no lasting results. For the next 2 years, the Belgian Parliament dithers on what to do, rejecting Leopold's offer to reform his regime, but reluctant to take control of the territory. In the meantime, Leopold seizes all he can from the CFS while the opportunity lasts, enlarging the domaine de la couronne to maximize his personal gain. A new law limiting the time the Congolese must work for the state to 40 hours a month is flagrantly abused. On the 10th of August in 1908, the Belgian Parliament finally acts, annexing the CFS under the colonial charter. The colony is renamed the Belgian Congo, and Leopold's power is limited to constitutional rather than personal rule. In recognition of the great sacrifices he has made for the Congo, Leopold receives a large payout. Over the time of Leopold's rule, the population of Congo has declined from an estimated 20 to 30 million to less than 9 million. Leopold attempts to destroy the evidence of the genocide, ordering that the CFS archives in the Belgium and the Congo are to be burnt. The Belgian Parliament will hold no formal commission of inquiry into the human rights abuses that occurred in the CFS, and no officials will be held to account. 12 months after the annexation, the Belgian colonial minister travels to Congo. On his return, he denies that the human rights abuses have occurred. In 1909, Leopold marries his lover, Blanche de la Croix, on the 12th of December, just 5 days before he dies on the 17th of December in Leopold, Belgium. Before dying, he signs a law instituting compulsory military service. He is buried at the Church of Our Lady in Leopold Cemetery in Brussels. With no surviving male heir, he is succeeded by his nephew, the 16-year-old Albert. Meanwhile, Arthur Conan Doyle publishes The Crime of the Congo, his account of how, under Leopold's rule, the Congolese have been robbed of all they possess, debauched, degraded, mutilated, tortured, murdered, all on such a scale as he has never, to my knowledge, occurred before the whole course of history. In attempting to explain how Leopold's seemingly philanthropic initial intentions towards the Congo may have been degenerated into one of the greatest crimes of all history, Doyle writes it is probable, as it seems to me that his ambitious mind discerned that it was possible for him to acquire a field of action which his small kingdom could not give, in mixing himself with the affairs of Africa. He chose the obvious path, that of a civilizing and elevating mission, taking the line of least resistance without any definite idea where it might lead him. Once faced with the facts, his astute brain perceived the great material possibilities of the country. His early dreams faded away to be replaced by unscrupulous cupidity. And step by step, he was led downwards until he was the man of holy aspirations in 1885, stands now in 1909 with such a cloud of terrible direct personal responsibility resting upon him as no man in modern European history had to bear, until Adolf Hitler. Doyle holds Leopold directly responsible for the abuses of the regime. It is upon the king, always the king, that the guilt must lie, he writes. He planned it, knowing the results which must follow. They did follow. He was well informed of it. Again and again, and yet again, his attention was drawn to it. A word from him would have altered the system. The word was never said. There was no possible subterfuge by which the moral guilt can be deflected from the head of the state, the man who went to Africa for the freedom of commerce and regeneration of the native. There is a little postscript which I will read for you guys. I know it's been 50 odd minutes, but if you've made it this far, congrats. Okay, so postscript. 1960. The territory formerly encompassed by the CFS finally achieves independence on the 30th of June and is renamed the Republic of Congo. However, in 1965, army leader Joseph Mobutu seizes control. Like Leopold, Mobutu rules over a corrupt and violent regime using his dictatorial powers to funnel the wealth of the Congo into his own pockets. In October 1971, the name of the country is changed to Zaire. In 1997, Mobutu is ousted in May, and the country renamed the Democratic Republic of Congo. The republic is quickly destabilized by internal divisions and intrusions from neighboring Rwanda and Uganda. In July 2002, Belgium's Royal Museum for Central Africa announces that it's commissioned a group of eminent historians to investigate the genocide that happened in CFS. We will look into these claims and directly investigate them, and by 2004 we will attempt to provide an answer. Guido Grisels, the director of the museum, says, "Part of the Belgian goal was to teach Africans to work, not the childish pursuits of own culture, but organized, rational routines of productive wage labor in the European manner for European employees," Grisels continues. However, such labor was considered to excise a civilizing influence. A profitable byproduct was the provision of cheap labor. The colonial charter had declared that no one could be compelled to work, and by 1912 the forced delivery of rubber and other natural products had come to a stop. But until the depression of the 1930s, mining and agricultural companies resorted to recruiting methods little different from forced labor. In 2003, the political situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo remains unstable, arguably a legacy of Leopold's regime and the decades of Belgium's colonial rule that followed. Corruption and the violence appear to be entrenched. Cases of rape, torture, execution, and cannibalism are widely reported. The International Rescue Committee estimates that 4.7 million have died through famine and warfare since 1997. And so this is the final comment. Towards the end of Joseph Conrad's novel The Heart of Darkness, there is a famous scene of the death of Kurtz, the corrupted agent of the company exploiting an equatorial country that is unnamed but based on the CFS. Anything approaching the change that came over his features I have never seen before and hope to never see again, Conrad writes. Oh, I wasn't touched. I was fascinated. It was as though a veil had been rent. I saw an ivory face expression of somber pride and ruthless power and craven terror, of an intense and hopeless despair. Did he live his life again in every detail of desire, temptation, and surrender, at the supreme moment of complete knowledge? He cried in a whisper at some image, at some vision. He cried out twice, a cry that was no more than a breath. The horror, the horror. The scene could have been a presentiment of King Leopold's own demise, though it is unlikely that Leopold experienced any such insight as he drew his last breath. The horror was not of his creation. Leopold maintained quite the reverse. Consider this quote from the king. Our only program, I am anxious to repeat, is the work and the moral and material regeneration. And we must do this among a population whose degeneration in its inherited conditions is difficult to measure. The many horrors and atrocities which disgrace humanity give way little by little before our invention. Quite a statement from one of the most notorious degenerates of the 19th century, Europe, and perpetuator of unnumbered atrocities within the CFS. Leopold was a hypocrite and a liar and of monumental proportions. He barely made it into the 20th century, but deserves to be listed as one of its worst killers. So this is off the moralists.net.au site. This is very in-depth, the most in-depth I've managed to find, which is free. And all the links for these articles which I've read out will be in the description. So I just thought, it's been a while and I wanted to do one of these about what happened in the Belgian Congo, CFS, and the Congo Free State, and the atrocities brought upon by King Leopold II's reign. And I hope that if you've watched this video, you've got a kind of an insight into what it was like for a native at the time, and what life was like at the time, and what life happened to be like. So yeah, it's been your boy DBK, and I'm gonna catch you a lot later, man. Peace.